Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first session today that looks at the collaborative networks, curating in the 21st century. My role today is to chair this discussion and to try and keep this illustrious panel on time to ensure that you all have time for questions at the end. So I'll start immediately by introducing the speakers. Then there will be a moment where each speaker will respond to the subject of today's discussion, and then there'll be an opportunity for us to have a short discussion in response to that person's subject. And then there will be time for questions at the end. So if you've got a burning question during the course of the various papers, please write it down so you can come back to us at the end. So I'm going to introduce the panel. On my left is David Elliott. David is a British curator, writer, and professor of modern and contemporary art. David has also directed museums in Oxford, Stockholm, Tokyo, and Istanbul. He is currently chairman of the board of the Triangle Art Network, Gasworks in London, chairman of the advisory board of Momentum in Berlin, and a visiting professor in curatorship at the Chinese University in Hong Kong. David has published many books, too many for me to mention, actually, but his newest is titled Art and Trousers, Tradition and Modernity in Contemporary Asian Art, and that's going to be published this year?
Yep,
okay.
Hope so.
Good. David was artistic director of the 17th Biennale of Sydney in 2008 and directed the inaugural International Biennale of Contemporary Art in Kiev in 2011. From 2012 to 2014, he was artistic director of the International Moscow Biennale of Young Art, as well as co-curating a number of international touring exhibitions. But most recently, he's curated major exhibitions in Berlin and Guangzhou. And this month, his exhibition Social Fabric, new work by Quan Shong-chi and Marianne Han, will open in the Mills here in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It's opened already, so you should go and see it. That's David. On next left is Menene Gras, is an art critic, journalist, curator, academic, and professional translator as well, which is always useful. Former professor of aesthetics at the University of Barcelona, Menene has been director of culture and exhibitions at Casa Asia, which is in both Barcelona and Madrid, since its foundation in 2003. Prior to that, Menene was cultural director of the Instituto Catalán de Cooperación Iberoamericana, as well as publishing more than 30 books, including 4 books of your own poetry. Yeah. Menene has written numerous essays and articles and was correspondent for Art Forum for 12 years. Her most recent publication, The Japanese Garden, Between the Spatiality and Temporality of the Landscape, was published in 2015 to coincide with her exhibition of the same title. Again, it's impossible for me to do justice to the depth and breadth of Menene's curatorial track record, but suffice to say, her work is international, and it would be a vast understatement to try and run through some of them. But one example would be Languages and Aesthetics of Spanish Video Art, 10 years of critical practice, which won the ACCA Best Traveling Project Award in 2015, having been seen in Seoul, Beijing, and Hong Kong. Is it still traveling around?
Yeah.
Still traveling. And it's going to Spain?
No, to Japan.
Oh, to Japan next. Okay, thanks. They've moved around, which has confused me. Jamie Wyld is director of Videoclub in the UK, an artist moving image platform that promotes and tours artist video and film nationally and internationally. Videoclub works with many partners, including Film London, Videotage in Hong Kong, which I'm sure you all know, the Seattle International Film Festival, and the Whitechapel Gallery. In 2013, Jamie set up This Is Wyld, which is a creative agency that works with other cultural organizations to develop and support their exhibitions, their commissioning projects, touring, education, business development, and fundraising. And I think this is, from my perspective as a Brit, I know this is where Jamie has a particularly impressive track record. Previously program curator at Lighthouse in Brighton in the UK, Jamie produced and delivered exhibitions working with some of the UK's most innovative artists, media artists predominantly, and for 4 years also ran the education and outreach program at Lighthouse. Jamie is a key figure in artist film and video in the UK and now internationally, and was contributing curator to the Brighton Digital Festival in 2011, 12 and 13. Okay. Jamie has also worked with the Arts Council for England and was responsible for organisations such as Gasworks Gallery, Acme Studios, Impressions Gallery, ArtQuest, and the Film and Video Umbrella. Each one of these organisations at one time or another supported the early careers of some of the UK's most well-known artists. This is a nice little segue because last year Jamie and Isaac Leung collaborated on the extremely successful project called Both Sides Now, which is a UK-Hong Kong touring programme of artist film and video that was screened at venues across the UK and in Hong Kong. And it also provided residency opportunities and numerous public events and discussions, and built an incredible following in both cities and globally through an impressive social media presence. So that leads me very nicely on to Isaac Leung, who I'm sure many of you will know. Isaac is an artist, curator, and researcher in art and culture. Has a doctorate from the City University of Hong Kong, specializing in contemporary Chinese art market, and has taught throughout the city at various institutions: Chinese University of Hong Kong, Hong Kong Baptist University, City University of Hong Kong, many places, and is currently lecturer in the Department of Culture and Creative Arts at Hong Kong Institute of Education. Okay. Isaac studied at both the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in the USA and Central St. Martin's in London. And for over a decade, from 1998, his own artwork was exhibited in more than 30 venues across the world and was featured on various media formats, including public radio in the US and various art magazines. In 2005, Isaac was consultant on the award-winning international exhibition Body Moves in Hong Kong. And in the same year, he was appointed as advisor of the digital community of the Prix Ars Electronica. In 2013, he was appointed chairman of Videotage HK, and during his tenure has initiated and participated in many projects, including exhibitions, workshops, lectures, publications, online projects, and symposia. So, and also I just want to say, make sure you stop by the crowdfunding pavilion stand, which is organized by Videotage, and maybe you want to contribute something to the crowdfunding initiative. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop, and I'm going to hand over to David to respond to this notion of curating in the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'm going to really say two groups of things about curating, which somehow meet in the middle, but they're really quite different. The first is that I think that curating isn't at all a collective activity. In fact, it's a rather lonely activity. And this is because I think that it's necessary, if you're going to be making decisions about art and artists, that you have good reasons for making those decisions. And I think the only reason you can decide to include a work in an exhibition is that you think it's really good, for whatever reasons. Well, that sounds very simple, but it's not really quite as simple, because you may be working with people you've known all your life, which is very unlikely. You may be working from people from the same town or city or the same country, which is more likely. Or you may be looking at another country entirely, even another culture, which in my case has been quite common. And how do you put that together? And the question of making decisions, discriminating, I use that in a positive sense, not a negative sense, is really based on comparison. Comparison on other art. Not that the otherness is a bad thing, but it does help put things into perspective and also come to a view of why something is, quotes, good, and other things much less interesting and maybe even bad. Now, interesting can be, of course, current of the moment, and certainly in an art fair you see lots of things of that kind. But it could be something that speaks to you in a much more visceral way or in a much more existential way, and could easily be interpreted by people from vastly different circumstances, language groups and cultures, if it were framed to them in a particular way. And as a curator, you were the person who's doing the framing. And as you mentioned, I was also a museum director. So I wasn't only looking at presenting the work of one artist or one exhibition with many artists. I was looking at the whole sequence of programs. And that's what, if you're doing as a curator, whether you have the power to do it within an organization, that's great if you have. But if not, in your career, there is a consequence between the different things that you do. And through that, the position comes out. Even if you think you haven't got a position, it is there. It is absolutely crystal clear. Very often people say to me, "Oh, I'm absolutely not political." Nothing more political than saying that, dear. The other thing I'd say about exhibitions and wanting to show an artist's work is that you feel that it's necessary. And this has to do with it being good. I mean, why should I do this, valuing your own time? Why should anyone else actually spend their time and energy going through this? Now, it's a question I ask myself every day. If I can't answer it, then I'm in trouble. I should be doing something else. So, that's one set of opinions. And another is a story about an organization of which I'm chairman of their board, which is Triangle Gasworks. And this is a very collaborative organization. It was founded in, I think, 1983 by Anthony Caro and Robert Loder. So Robert Loder is a kind of roving entrepreneur who spent a lot of time in Africa, and Anthony Caro, sculptor. And the idea was to do artist workshops and bring artists together. First one took place in Bennington, outside New York. Then the next one was in Johannesburg in South Africa. And in that, it was bringing artists from outside, from the UK, from other parts, with artists from South Africa at that time, still under apartheid, and providing a new opportunity, a new perspective, a new necessity, if you like. And it's grew and grown and grown and grown. Essentially, it was, of course, a colonial organization. It was based in London, and these white men were coming out and setting all this up very kindly and fairly efficiently. And people were duly grateful. They really were. But the world has changed, thank God, since then. Sometimes it changes for the better. And the network really is a network, and it's an equal platform. And we're now having to really rethink collaboration, of how we in London are necessary for others, and they are necessary for us. Because without that, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever that it should operate. So we're really looking at the whole question of the reciprocity of necessity. Now, if you can say that, you've got very, very nimble lips. I think that's all for the moment.
So from the rest of the panelists, does anyone have anything burning that they want to respond immediately to what David has said? Okay, well, I've got some things I want to ask you, David. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned something about options in the 21st century for curators to test their position, particularly if they're early in their career. And I was wondering, when you said that, I immediately thought, yes, you're absolutely right. At the beginning of my career, I often made mistakes. And I just wonder if you think it's possible now, in the both worlds that you've been involved in the museum environment and in then the much more independent curatorial environment, if you think it's possible to test and make mistakes.
Yes, I'm sure it is. I mean, everyone learns in that way, and no, I think if you've got an idea of yourself as this sort of super successful curator where the sun shines out of their backside, there are a number of people who do have that view of themselves. I mean, it's really not interesting whatsoever. You have to be humble, and humility begins at home. and you have to be respectful of artists because they're actually taking the risks. They're taking the first level of risk. You're taking a second level of risk in putting it all together, but you're not really thinking about that. You're thinking of actually building something and creating something together, and bringing two things together. I know even on this show that you mentioned, at Mill 6 Foundation, this is two artists who really didn't know each other, one from Berlin, one from here, one male, one female, who are making very, very different work. But at some very primordial level, it relates to the identity of Hong Kong. And this came off, thank God. It could not. It possibly could not have come off. But they were both good artists. And they really put their best into it. And I think a lot of that is to do with quality. If you really work hard and think hard, and then the midwife, which is my role in this case, does a nice birth, it will work. So there's trust and hope and faith and all this, but you make it.
Okay, well, I might bring us all back to that at the end, because this idea of failure, I think, is something that we can reflect on when we're talking about the future of curatorial practice. So something that you said also about the curator constructing some kind of secondary, well, it's the sort of further interpretation of the artist's work leads me very comfortably on to Menene. So I would like you to take over, Menene, if you would, and give us some of your responses to the subject.
Well, thank you, first of all, for your generous presentation, and also thank you to Isaac, because he organized all that, and I think for the first time here in Basel Art Fair, and I think this has been really important for us. Well, at the beginning we were speaking about whose role was for all of us, and we were saying what we are going to speak about, and one of the things I consider as a key thing is how we can define or describe the role of the curator nowadays. And to me, I identify the curator with constructing narratives. I think that this is one of the basic things, at least to me, when you are in front of a project and you think that you are going to gather different works and you want to tell a story, you want to give an argument, and you have to justify what you are doing. This kind of role, which I think it can be very simple, as you said before, or as David said, is not all that simple. I think it's a very complex thing, because, you have to tell a story and you have to think about it, and you have to think why you are going to select, to make a choice instead of another choice. This would be the first thing, but the second thing is the value of interpretation, which I think is another key word for a curator. You are doing an interpretation of the history, you are interpreting geography, you are interpreting the work that has been done by the artist, and then you, after all that, you can just build up a kind of narration of what you want to say. Then you are not a writer, but at the same time you need to write something, virtually or physically, because you need to construct some narration, you need to use the language, some language, just to say what you are going to do and what you want to tell. And this to me is what I would say a kind of key tool before starting to tell something to anyone. I think it depends on the context, it depends on the public or the audiences you are addressed to, but above all, you are thinking about as a historian, as a geographer or cartographer, and you have to know what you want to say, what you want to do, what you want to show, and how, at the same time, putting different works in relationship, you are at the same time giving a value to all these kind of works. You were speaking about comparison. You need to compare. It's absolutely like this. When you proceed to an interpretation, you are somehow putting in relationship different things, different works, different artists, and you need to know how to link all that and to say this is my narration or this is not. It happens to be with a collective project, but it happens to be too when you want to do an exhibition about an artist that can be an individual or a self-exhibition, then you also have to think about the career, you have to think about the works you want to present, about how you want to show that. But said that, I would say that a lot of students, when they are trying to study curatorial programs, curatorial studies, they think, well, I'm going to make that, I am going to do this postgraduate studies, I am going to do this master, but when they finish, they realize that they don't know how to put it into practice. They realize that they are not curators, as some students who go to the art studies and they realize that they are not artists because they did this career or another career. Then I think that the experience is the basis of all that, and also working on this sector, or working with artists, working and putting the experiences together is the only way to know how to be or to become a curator, how to become an artist. Although to be an artist or to be a curator are very, very different things. I mean, as a curator, you just gather things. First is the artist, as you said. I mean, if there is no work, there is no curator. If there is no artist, there is no exhibition. Then we part. Our point of departure is always the narration that is already made by the artist. And what we do is a kind of meta-narration, because in the end we are building a new narration about the narration that was already done by someone else, which is the artist at the beginning. I mean, the role of the curator nowadays is a very complex role. It's not a role that you can learn anywhere. It is not a role that you learn when you have done your master or your postgraduate studies, but it's something else. It's a very complex experience. It means that you have to gather a lot of different studies, a lot of different experiences, and after that you can really be able to do some project in which you are involved, in which you involve the artist and you are engaged yourself. I mean, this could be also another point of departure for another discussion, but I mean, I remember once being in the Bard College in the curatorial studies program. And I remember that there were a lot of discussions about all this interpretation, selection, building up a narration, and I mean all this process of a curator and how this role had been changing since the last century, I mean the 20th century until now. We are in a very different situation as curators were in the 60s and the 70s or the 80s, and I think that that is something that afterwards we can just go on seeing or talking about, because, well, I don't want to be...
Well, I've got a question for you that leads on from that, Menene, and maybe others can feed into it. What you've been describing in terms of this kind of univocal narrative, the curator as authority who makes the narrative, that tells the story in perhaps a didactic way. Do you think that, and does the panel think that that's changing rapidly? An example would be a project that Isaac is doing in Hong Kong right now at Connecting Space, where there are 8 curators involved in an ill-defined project that doesn't have any specific outcome. I've been involved in that project, and it was very challenging for me, having come from an institutional background, to kind of give up that authority. So I wonder how the others briefly want to...
Well, I think that, it's a very relative authority. I mean, the artist also has an authority. You can have an authority, you really... Yeah, it depends on how influent you are, how your opinion is for other people, for the audiences. I mean, sometimes the artist wants to be curated by you because he thinks that if you are curating his work, then his work will have another value. Then this is quite difficult to say, although in the end, your authority is the authority of the writer, the authority of the poet, the authority of... That is, I think, the authority. But it is true that nowadays, socially speaking, I mean, if you are in a museum instead of another museum, it means that, you are someone that your work is worthwhile of this price. I mean, in the end, everything is a market. And I mean, the curators are also in the market. And it means that we are not free from that, and that you can have an authority to the extent you are in that market. That is really when you put in relationship this curatorship with or in relation to the existing market in any place of the world. That is like this. I mean, you cannot do anything else. But
well, thank you also for that, Menene, because you've allowed me to make yet another really comfortable segue into Jamie Wyld's response, because Jamie steps between both a very, very much market-driven environment and then a very much artist-led, curator-led environment. So, Jamie.
Yeah, I think sort of in response, especially to something David said at the end, which was about collaboration being a necessity. And a lot of the work that I do is actually much more about networked curating. So actually thinking about how networks can establish a way or methodology of curating that changes every time. So it's much more about evolving the curatorial model every time that you curate something. So a lot of the time when I'm curating an exhibition, I'll work directly with the artist to actually curate the show rather than actually me coming up with the idea. We actually do it in a much more collaborative, participatory way. And as well, David said that curating is quite a lonely thing. I actually find it the opposite. Because I tend to work through different networks, I'm always co-curating everything. I work with Isaac, and as Adrian said, I work with Film London and all different types of organizations, and I tend to sort of use different principles or ideas that different organizations are coming up with to also add in my own sort of ideas and thoughts, and then develop an exhibition or a showcase or a screening or a commission, sort of using the different types of language that different organizations will come up with. Something that I did want to talk about was actually about networks and the dynamics of networks and the distinctiveness that sometimes can get lost when you're working within a network of different individuals and organizations. And part of me worries about how you maintain the distinctiveness of your organization or you as an individual curator, because I'm always going out there working with other people, and sometimes I worry that I'm actually just replicating someone else's idea rather than actually making something distinctive of my own. And something else that I also think about sort of in terms of sharing, because we're constantly sort of, I'm constantly online and always on social networks and playing games where I'm talking to people all around the world and actually start talking about my job, and people have really bizarre responses, and sometimes that actually influences how I'm thinking about something that I'm curating. And some of those things around challenges of sharing, I think, you share your contacts, you share your contacts with artists or ideas, what you're thinking about, how you're curating, and also you start to share your national identity or start to believe you're sharing someone else's identity, and everything sort of gets lost in this big soup. But it also brings things together and starts to make things really precise when you start to think about those things and you start to think about a principal idea that you actually want to deliver, and then suddenly all of those networks are suddenly super valuable to enable you to actually find that artist who's working in a certain way that you want to bring together. like Isaac and I usually have a theme for the program we do called Both Sides Now, and every year we sort of come together and we think through this theme, and it changes and it evolves, and eventually we'll go, okay, we actually need to curate the show now, so let's pin down the idea. And we're always like, Skyping or sending messages to each other and saying, oh, I've come up with this other idea. So I think the way that you're curating in the 21st century is much more networked and much more discursive and much more open and sort of much freer and much more fluid and a lot less sort of rigid and sort of based on, Deleuzian theory or something. So I think the role of technology is taking a really big role and sort of breaking down those national borders, and different identities are coming together, so you're getting something that's a lot more fluid and much more accessible to people, I think. Oh, was that not very long? I told me to talk more.
It was long enough, actually.
You could use my time.
Well, David, you were writing a bit there. Do you want to say something, or I can step in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with collaborating and working with people. I mean, any good curator is dependent on a whole chain of others. I mean, you're both, they're sharing with you. Sometimes you're taking, appropriating good ideas and things like this, and sometimes you know them, sometimes you don't. No, I don't think that's loneliness, but I think you do have to have a distance. And this idea of critical distance is very, very important. And if you don't have that, if really you're curating out of your address book or your Facebook buddies or something like that, it just doesn't, well, I mean, a lot of people do, but it doesn't end up with a very good thing. Now, your word sharing is something I think is very, very important. And for me, this relates to tone of voice. If you like, the curatorial tone of voice or the institutional tone of voice, is that you're not forcing people to do or think anything. You're not telling them what to think. You're not telling them what to feel. If they don't like art, for God's sake, don't bother. I mean, it's fine. If you don't like art, don't try. But if you do, or if you're curious or something and it gets you about it, just to say, actually, I'm showing it because I think it's really good, and there's a toolbox for you to understand why I think it is, and I just really want to share it with you, and it's on that basis. And that this goodness is something, the artist isn't stupid, and I hope I'm not, and it really can create something. Now, whether this is discourse or not, I don't know, because some art is non-discursive, but it affects in different ways. I mean, it can impress you. It can be like a time bomb, and all of a sudden, a fortnight later, you wake up, or it can just be insidious on the way how you look at things, and you just can't predict because it's different. And that's the great thing about it. That's why we want to work with it. That it's unpredictable. But this red thread of quality is something that we're always looking for. And of course, that the change in media and networks and all of this, it speeds things up. But it doesn't make them better. Sometimes it makes them worse. It's easier. But it can, I don't think the medium is the message in this case at all.
I wanted to add something. I mean that sometimes this collaborative networking doesn't mean that you are going to be different or that you have a real communication with other curators. It doesn't mean at all. I remember I made a big project which was called The Power of Art with other 5 international curators, and among themselves they didn't speak at all. I mean, I tried to get them in common. I tried to call all of them and say, please speak to each other, because, well, I can't speak to all of you, but please speak to each other. And they said, yes, we agree. We don't need to speak. We are going to meet the day of the opening. And I said, no, please. But that happens to be. I mean, it's there is a lot of language about it that is more the language than the reality. This is one thing. But speaking about sharing the experience between the curator and the artist, I believe on this experience because I think that this dialogue is the important one, the one you keep with the artist. Sometimes because you help somehow the artist to see things that he cannot see because he's too near the work, and sometimes it's the artist who helps you to understand what he is doing or what you have to see in their work. And I mean, I have the experience in many ways, in both ways, and I think that this dialogue is very powerful, and there is a potential there that really I think it's the most important thing. Then one of my key things is this dialogue between curator and artist. Sometimes this dialogue doesn't exist at all because the curator says, I want this work, this work, this work, and even he does not speak to the artist. He has never had any conversation with the artist, but the work is enough. And I don't think that this is the way to do this practice. Sorry about that.
That's okay, you're entitled to your opinion.
We can share about, like, you know, me and Adrian in a group of curating each other.
So I'm going to introduce Isaac, and one of the things that David said struck me as being very pertinent to Isaac, and that's about unpredictability. And so we'll see what unpredictable things Isaac might say during the course of his few minutes. No, go on.
I think it's right on. We talk about sharing and also collaboration. Before I start, I just want to make a recalling Adrian's advertisement. Please support us. We are collaborating with Momentum for a Kickstarter project, and it just started 2 days ago. And please visit our booth on level 3, and we really need your help to realize this artistic project. I'm very happy that, like, you know, all Videotage partners are here. Like, I think this is right on because, like, we are sharing really our experience together, real experience of collaboration. Perhaps, like, today I'm not so much talking about curating, but more like, you know, throwing some sort of questions about 21st century. So basically I'm going to, I pick actually some keywords here, and then we can actually, based on these kind of ideas, and then, like, you know, to have a discussion. These are the keywords, and I'm just going to go to each of them one by one. I think it's one of the main ideas is that, like, how we can actually curate and remain relevant our program in the 21st century, because I think this is we're really in a crossroad of, you know, doing in many directions, could be in many directions. So 21st century. The first thing I want to talk about is, like, you know, young generation and also technologies and social media. And these are the really main keywords that in the 21st century that our whole world is dramatically changing. This picture, this is by the time when I was in art school, when, you know, the phone and the camera was two separate things. And now we have the phone and the camera. I studied video art, by the way. And now I can use my iPhone to take videos. So I think this is, like, you know, we are in a new generation that is, like, completely different. We used to, when we talk about Rembrandt's painting in a museum, if you Google Rembrandt, you would, you know, see this painting. But then, like, you know, if you Google Rembrandt and museum right now, you can see a lot of kids playing with a cell phone, sitting in front of Rembrandt's painting and not looking at the painting. So I think this is, like, you know, really a different time. I think we are just, like, you know, how we can museum engage audience and engage the new generation. I think on the left-hand side, the picture is the perfect picture that a lot of museums were, you know, foreseeing. The whole family were, you know, going to a museum and pointing at the artwork and artifacts and learn about art. But I think, you know, in reality, it's like usually on the right-hand side where the whole family are not talking to each other and they talk to each other via WhatsApp, which is exactly how I communicate with my parents, and they're both, like, over 65 years old. So I think this is, like, really amazing, right? Right now we are in a world that, like, which is completely different. I think, if we think about like Louvre Museum was, the 10, top 10 most like Facebook check-in, last year, which actually speaks a lot that I think like if you go to Louvre in front of Mona Lisa, we basically, before you see Mona Lisa, you just see a lot of people, piles of people like taking selfies. So I think this is like we are in a time where, not just food, I think food is no longer food. Food is articulated and interlinked with our cell phone and food porn. And I think art also, that like basically, art like is no longer just art, but like, art is like always come with like a Googleized art or Googleized, Facebookized food and something like that. I think a lot of art practitioners are really trying to, incorporate new media, and also in terms of the promotion and everything. Just like, you see Guggenheim, I think like really Videotage has been really trying to push social media, and until today we only have like 3,046 likes on our Facebook page, which is like just really hard. I think like in Guggenheim, which is like a lot better, but I think if we think about that, if we compare to, somebody like a YouTuber, like Michelle Phan, who is like, only 25 years old, and she is like the richest 25 years old girl in the world, and by making video about mascara, basically. So she got billion hits, and Guggenheim spent 5 years of time and only have 60,000 people on the page. So I think like how museum and art practitioners, curator, and putting art, remain relevant is like the biggest question. And for me, I think like I absolutely don't like Michelle Phan's work because I don't do mascara, and I think like all these kind of video are not really well made. But at the same time, I think as a curator of moving image, how we can actually keep the standard, teach, the public about video art, right? But at the same time, we are fighting with a huge network of these individuals who actually just make the video in 3 minutes and then upload it, to the YouTube channel and becoming really rich. So it goes to another batch of keywords, which is about infrastructure, placemaking, internationalization, partnership, which is exactly what we are talking right now. I think globally in the 21st century, we have a lot of infrastructural buildings. I think Hong Kong is having M+, having West Kowloon District. I think like it's quite interesting just to look at this slide. In Guangzhou, Rome, Seoul, and Hong Kong, we all have Zaha Hadid. And and almost sometimes when I go to Seoul and different cities, and I just like, oh, am I in Hong Kong or something? And when I'm in Seoul, I thought I was in Guangzhou. And I think this is really the biggest problem of globalization, how art practitioners and museum owners can still keep that kind of localness or local culture in against that kind of global phenomenon. So I think like we all think that we need Zaha Hadid somehow, but at the same time, how we can keep our museum different. So this is goes to this picture. We don't want the global and local to go in different directions. We want them to tie in together. But I think like I think right now I don't see a lot of projects actually tying these two things very well. So we can actually talk about that. And ultimately, I think this is about values construction. I mean, this century is really about how we can build values based on infrastructure and based on collaboration. So this is a very typical museum structure that has the board director, and also, we try to deconstruct Videotage without board, but like we can't because we need to apply for the Art Council thing. That's a prerequisite. But I think like, does this kind of bureaucratic structure still relevant? Because I think the whole world is just moving so fast. I think Jamie can share about actually Videoclub is amazing. Like there's no staff and do so many projects, right? And Videotage actually ever since I'm the chairman, we have a very new way of human resources management. Basically, it's so ad hoc. Like I'm calling staff at 3 a.m. and say, hey, wake up! Like we have to like. So we don't have forms to fill in. I was like asking our manager, how come during the Art Basel time, one of our staff is on annual leave and we don't know, we don't have a system. So it's so chaotic. And I think but it somehow works. And I think how, government institutions and museums could remain relevant by building a new structure, infrastructure. So I think we are also in academia, in many institutions are facing the same problem. We can see, this is we are, it used to be so linear, but now we are in a multi-directional, how actually the infrastructure inside the museum record to Zaha Hadid is the biggest problem. We just don't want to have a building out there, but inside the building, it remains 19th century or 20th century. So if you put it in a map that is really about the real world. This is how things works right now. If you just everybody just lock onto your iPhone, this is like this. But I think the biggest problem is that we all deem to just go to work and be a 19th century person. And you can wait until you finish work, and then, okay, now I'm on my iPhone and Facebook, I'm 21st century. So we hate our job, we hate our institution, we hate being a curator, but at the same time, we feel so happy about touching our iPhone and Facebook. So I think there is a problem with us. I think we need to make our work environment a lot more happier. So the last thing is bottom-up force, everyday culture and community engagement. I think the biggest problem about community engagement in this century is that a lot of community engagement are not really engagement. They are just community outreach. That means the museum people, curators, they just go out from the office, out of the office. And you go out doesn't mean that you're engaging. How we can engage the new audience in the 21st century is so important. This is the whole culture about decentralization in the 21st century. If you see, in any other sectors, in hotel business, Airbnb only have 3 staff managing the website. And it is the biggest hotel chain. And Sheraton is not so worried about Hilton. They must be worrying about Airbnb. So just HSBC would not be so much worrying about Citibank, but would be worrying about PayPal, because these are really powerful platforms that are already there in the 21st century, and they are making huge impact on human activities. And I think a lot of them are also very political too. They are not only making money, but they are really cherishing individuals' power, such as if, I was just talking yesterday, can we have an app of renting an artist out for 3 hours and then just to teach the kids painting? Can we rent a curator for half an hour just to do the toilet job? I don't know. So there should be some way of, a new way of working, and not just planning an exhibition 3 years ahead and then all this kind of thing, because the world has been changed. So to sum up, I think this is our world is basically call it micro power versus system. I think 21st century is like this motherboard. We need to have the motherboard, but at the same time, this is a system that if one of these little chips inside the motherboard is not working, the whole motherboard would not be working. We have to come up with the strategies that keep the motherboard and also keep the individual's power. So this is really important and the biggest difficult question. So to speak, we're redefining reality. Just 3 more slides. This is another advertisement that Videotage booth upstairs. Please donate us money. Really thank you, Art Basel crowdfunding initiative. And I think what we are doing right now is really trying very hard to create a new model. Because I think artwork would not be changed if we don't have a new model behind. And particularly economic model. I think we need to have alternative ways of doing things and curating things, collaboration. And both sides now, Jamie, this is our project, and I think we don't even know what we're going to do right before the opening. And so I think this is great because, and we made it, we got all these, good, kind of feedback from audience and everything. I don't know how it works sometimes. Like, I need to write a paper to study that. Yeah, but then, like, I think it somehow works. I think, like, we are experimenting. What I want to say is Videotage has been doing, like, sharing economy concept. We only get 40,000 Hong Kong dollars for this project from the government. So, and then we did 10 screenings in Hong Kong and UK, 3 exhibitions last year, 4 residency program with 40,000 Hong Kong dollars. The concept is that, like, how we can, if Videotage has $40,000, and if all our partners also have $40,000, if we all contribute $40,000 Hong Kong dollars, can we make an impactful project? So it's not like traditionally, if we want to do a project by Videotage, to go to so many places, we probably need to apply from the government like $10 million 3 years ago to go through 10,000 forms, right? But we only asked for $40,000. And then we made something, through collaboration. I think this is like the way to go. I think the government would be very happy that all the organization, you don't need that much money because you only need $40,000. So this is Menene, and like we have been working a lot with Casa Asia. And Videotage program has been really wanting to create kind of new ways of interaction with audience. For example, we participate at Clock and Flap, one of the biggest music festival in Hong Kong. And I learned a lot because in the screening program in the cinema, I see kids taking selfies in front of the screen of video art. So, like, I think in the past, audience are so scared. They would just sit there and then watch the film, but the kids are completely different. And then they, I every day finish my program, I would go to Instagram and do hashtag, okay, all right, and then detour, that's it, actually. Last word. I think I'm just going to sum up with this. It takes a network to serve a network. We are all a network to serve this kind of network. But I think we need a new network to fight a network because our network is already here, but we are not there yet. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. So I'm not even going to ask these guys to speak. I'm not going to ask these guys to speak. I'm going to give you guys a chance to speak. So if there are any questions, please put this one immediately there. Whoever's got the mic right at the front, second row. They're coming, hold on. There you go. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Catherine. I just want to ask a question about the sharing and communication with the audience. Because I'm thinking, you have talked about the sharing with artists, which is very important. But for the audience side, I think from time to time it's more important to look at them because for the government or whatever organizers, they may look at the numbers of attendance instead of the quality of the art in some sense. So when you are doing curating, do you have this, I think honestly, this struggle will be in your mind. If it is happen, how can you adjust your psychological struggle on this and to how many percentage or proportion that you have spent your time or seen that the art that really fit into the audience instead of its purely artistic angle on choosing the pieces?
Does someone want to respond immediately to that? David? Anybody? Menene?
I think that this is a difficult question to answer because we always have this on us. I mean, people want the results. They want people everywhere. They want, I don't know how to say it, but they want to know that the results are these ones in economical terms and in terms of people going to an event. No? But I don't think that none of us is thinking about this in these terms, at least myself. I mean, you try to do the best you can, but I don't know, maybe you can answer too.
Well, I think the audience, because we're talking about contemporary art rather than shows of modern or historical art, the thing about the contemporary art is it's new. People don't yet know what it is. It's in the process of becoming. And so there's no demand for it because it's not out there. And in a sense, people, when they're encountering contemporary art, don't know what they want. They want something that they can't imagine, maybe, or haven't experienced before. I never really think about the audience other than through myself, because I'm a member of the audience. And if I think it's really good, I'll go with it, and I'll stand by it. And sometimes I'm accused of, one time I was being investigated by the police for showing child pornography. It wasn't, and it was never made into a prosecution. But someone complained in the press, and there was a big row about it, hysterical, and actually someone had to stand up and say, look, this is manipulation of the media by a few interest groups with perfectly legitimate cases, of course. Child pornography is wrong, but why should they pick on this to publicize it? So, art does pick on, it's deep, it goes deep, it deals with deep emotions, horrible events, fantastic things. If it's any good, it actually gives you some idea of how good and fragile it is to be alive. And that's a trust that you as an artist, you've got no choice other than to make it. If you're a curator, it's your trust to actually communicate it. And sometimes you have to have a position, and sometimes it's right to hold to that position. And sometimes if you realize that you've made a mistake, you must say so as well. Not everyone's automatically right. But I think that, if you're always trying to second guess what others will think, I can remember thinking, oh God, am I going to have trouble with this? Not one comment was made or whatever. And then something absolutely you didn't expect hits you. That goes with the job.
So,
but it's healthy. It means very healthy to have those debates, and also to have people who stand up and speak their mind. I must say the Tate Gallery has been absolutely cowardly in their way of approaching this.
So is there another question from the audience? I can't see any hands. Oh, here's one.
Hi, my name's Erica. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Just a follow-up question to that. In the 21st century, do you feel like you have more freedom to curate whatever you want, or is there more of a risk of getting prosecuted? I guess the level of freedom to curate in the 21st century, how do you feel about that?
Who's going to answer that? I can start, and then that might inspire you to speak.
Yeah, you can talk about government collection.
No, I'm not going to talk about the government art collection. I'm going to... I have a very pragmatic response to curatorial practice. I usually start with an idea, but I usually end up worrying about things like the health and safety, public access, these very pragmatic things that some of us have to deal with, and some people don't have to deal with. And actually, I find it very freeing. New models of curatorial practice free me from all the fear and constraint that the institution puts around me, and I am more able to take risk if I'm working in a curatorial model that is beyond the institution. So, you guys?
I think, there's no such a thing as ultimate freedom in any aspect in life anyways. I think I would use the word tactics. I think, as a curator, you always need to think about tactics, because the money source, where it is coming from, and and all this kind of space, each space, for example, we do a lot of different projects elsewhere and not in our gallery, right? And each space has its own context, right? So I think you just have to be very tactical. Communication is just very important. Make sure that people are on the same page when the day the project is out. Before that day, they know what you're doing, and with discussion. Yeah. But I don't think there is ultimate freedom anyways in life.
Yeah, I think context is really important, and you have to be really considerate about the place that you're in and who you're working with and how you're working with particular artists' work as well. So I think it's very much about the situation that you're in that determines what you're doing.
Okay, I think we might have time for one. No, it's definitely saying no. Okay, I'm scared to carry on.
Sorry.
Okay, well, I'm just going to make one word of summing up. And what I've picked up from all the conversations we had today is that the future of curatorial practice is potentially and probably continually evolving, and it provides a challenge for all of us to respond to that evolution in the same way that perhaps the museum sector is not evolving quickly enough in response to what curators and artists want to deliver. So I think the future of curatorial practice is ever changing and should be forever changing. So I think on that note, I'm going to thank the panelists because that was really fascinating topics for discussion, and thank our two questions because that was also very interesting.
Just one thing. I think also that the institutions, the big museums, have to stand up for art and artists freedom, not to do absolutely anything, but to have artistic freedom, and this is really, really important. And if they don't do that, they're not doing their job, and they're just entertainment palaces.
Okay, thank you very much.